Gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to the Riverside and thank you for being part of Gainsborough's history today. My name is Darren Childs. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Delvers History Group. Can I have a show of hands if you're from Gainsborough? Show of hands. Right, okay. If you're not, stick your hand up if you've travelled more than an hour. No, we haven't got anybody travelling an hour. I did get some messages through about people that were planning long distance, and I wanted to welcome them especially today, if they've made it. If not, this will be on the social media channels, the Delvers social media channels, later on today. Did you know that there are in fact 17 blue plaques throughout Gainsborough, the Delvers blue plaques throughout Gainsborough? The first of which was dedicated 25 years ago. Where did that go, eh? 25 years ago. It was dedicated on Bridge Street on the 29th of August 1997 to Gainsborough-born author and poet Thomas Miller. I'd first like to give an enormous thank you to Thelma Childs, the founder of the Delvers, for giving over 35 years of her life educating me and us about the history of Old Gainsborough. Thelma has lived in the town all of her life, and I will now ask Steph to present a token of our appreciation to Thelma. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Faye and her team at West Lindsey, who are working in association with the Delvers on a new publication featuring all the Delvers blue plaques, which will be available later this summer. Each of the blue plaques tells their own unique story. I'd also like to thank Keith Vince, who runs the Roses of Gainsborough Facebook page. Members of the Rose family. Annabelle? Did you have a word to say at all? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say thank you very much. So I'm sort of granddaughter of the Roses. So my father William and my uncle Alfred. Unfortunately, neither of them could be here today, but myself and 3 of my children, Joseph, Alfie and Ellie, and one is missing at school. We'd just like to say how proud we are, and yeah, it's amazing, and I wish more than anything that my 2 boys could have sort of taken it over and really done it. I'm trying really hard. But yes, thank you, and if anybody wants to come and share any stories with us, we'd love to hear. Like, we sat in the Heritage Centre the other day, and I could have sat there for hours. Any stories about my grandma, definitely very interested. But yeah, we're very, very proud to be Roses, and we'll try and keep the legacy going for as long as we can. So thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. I'd also like to thank Sue Edlington, who authored a book on Roses. Thank you, Sue. Linda Browning, who's here today, whose father met Guy Gibson, Bomber Harris, at Rosie's Albion Works. And the Heritage Centre and the Friends of the Old Hall, who are both represented here today. This blue plaque is dedicated to everyone who worked with or had a connection with Roses of Gainsborough. Quite simply, a remarkable engineering firm. Therefore, for many of you, this plaque is dedicated to you. The first commodity to be mechanically wrapped in packets for sale in England was tobacco, and the inventor of the machine was the self-taught William Rose of Gainsborough. Half a century later, the order books of Roses were full, and thanks to the men and women of Gainsborough that helped build and grow the firm, Roses flourished. The Roses Albion Works stood just a stone's throw away, just here, and it was still growing. On the 9th of May 1940, Neville Chamberlain lost the confidence of the House of Commons The next day, Winston Churchill became the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. Churchill incidentally visited Gainsborough 35 years earlier as the young Liberal MP for Oldham. Churchill had long opposed a surrender deal with Hitler, and on the 12th of May 1940 promised the British people nothing but blood, sweat and tears, with a policy to wage war by sea, land and air. It was by air just 3 years later, in May 1943, that roses would play a significant part, now exactly 80 years ago. From the start of World War II, the workers of Roses were involved in vital but highly confidential war work, establishing strong connections with the bomber group of Lincolnshire, specifically RAF Scampton and Hemswell. In May 1943, when Roses undertook work for the Lancaster bomber, it was evident something big was in the air. After the Dam Busters raids, the station engineer at Scampton phoned through to Roses, emphasising it was their vital work that had made the operation successful. Throughout this time, all the big names of the RAF visited the Albion Works here on the riverside. Arthur Harris, Leonard Cheshire, Guy Gibson and many others which are now legend. Please join with me in giving thanks to those wonderful men and women that made such a significant contribution, and please show your very special appreciation for our guest, Group Captain James Belden. James, on behalf of the Delvers, please accept this token of our appreciation for your dedication today. It's a signed copy of Max Hastings' Operation Chastise, the story of the Dam Busters. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much. Thank you, James. Well, that was a most unexpected but most welcome gift. Darren and the Delvers, thank you so much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you, and a warm welcome to you all, and especially as well to the Air Cadets and staff of number 203 Gainsborough Squadron of the Air Training Corps. It's a real privilege to be amongst so many distinguished guests with such rich connections with the Rose Brothers Company and to those who worked in their factories. And it's a real honour to have been invited to unveil a blue plaque commemorating the invaluable contribution that Roses and all those that worked at the company during the Second World War made to the war effort. I also express my deep admiration to the Delvers for the incredible work that you all do in preserving and commemorating and celebrating Gainsborough's history, not least Thelma, who has been recognised today, but thank you very much indeed, and to Darren as well, and to Faye from West Lindsey District Council for making the arrangements for today's event. It is difficult to overstate the high esteem in which this magnificent company, this Gainsborough company, was held by all those in the know across the armed forces. Its credentials in this regard have been firmly established in the First World War, when Roses produced vast amounts of ammunition for the British Expeditionary Force in France, and also designed and manufactured the sighting and gunnery systems for the Royal Navy's Q ships, which were very special. Q ships were disguised merchant vessels which lured German combatant ships into close proximity before letting slip their disguise, revealing their guns and engaging in destructive and successful combat against the enemy. But perhaps most significantly, and I suppose I would say this as a Royal Air Force officer, the First World War marked the beginning of a long and fruitful relationship with the country's air services. First of all with the Royal Flying Corps, for which, among other initiatives, Roses developed a mechanism to synchronise forward-firing machine guns that could fire through the arc of the propeller without hitting the propeller blades. It was a really important innovation in air combat. And the relationship prospered further following the formation of the Royal Air Force in 1918, and whilst the imperatives of war were overtaken by what we might now call a peace dividend, when the services shrunk and dwindled in the post-war period, the Royal Air Force never forgot the importance of the contribution that Roses had made to the war effort through their design and engineering endeavours. One officer who took special note and was to be of great significance later was Arthur T. Harris, who in the mid-1920s was a bomber squadron commander and who would later rise to become Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief Bomber Command, and known to most of us as Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Bomber Harris. As a squadron commander in the interwar years, Harris was frustrated by the bureaucracy that impeded the modification and rectification of his aircraft to overcome design flaws and other problems. But cutting through the red tape, Harris was known occasionally to take matters into his own hands, for instance by cutting a hole in the floor of his Vickers Virginia bombers to enable better targeting of their bombs. At the risk of upsetting the Air Ministry, a bit like today's Ministry of Defence, it was an ethos that Harris took forward into the Second World War. However, given the growing capability and complexity of the aircraft, the hugely increased scale of the problems, and the enormous responsibilities that Harris held, he was no longer able to conduct the coal-face modifications that he had previously made as a squadron commander. So it was to Roses that he turned. In early 1940, as Air Officer Commanding No. 5 Group, Harris sought to rectify the defensive deficiencies of the Handley Page Hampton bomber. He said that the Hampton was then a most feebly armed aircraft with a single gun on top and one underneath, manned by a gunner in a helplessly cramped position, together with a gun firing forward, which, as it was fixed, was no use at all. It took Roses less than a fortnight to produce a gun mount that effectively doubled the firepower of the Handley Page Hampton, and within weeks they were in full production and flying on operations. This success marked the genesis of further developments that Rose made in defensive armament, design and manufacture, the most famous of which was the Rose turret that entered service with the bombers of locally based No. 1 Group in 1944. Again, despite a recognised need to enhance the defensive armament of Bomber Command's heavy bombers in order to mitigate the lethal threat posed by German night fighters, which were armed to the teeth with heavy explosive cannons that vastly outranged and outgunned the defensive rifle caliber bullets fired by the bombers' machine guns, bureaucracy and technical difficulties stalled the development of an effective rear turret. Circumventing the usual processes, Harris went straight to Roses, who developed a turret that not only offered much heavier firepower through its half-inch machine guns, but provided gunners with a much better aiming system and field of view. And indeed, it was probably the enhanced visibility provided by the turret that contributed most of all to the relatively low loss rate of Rose turret-equipped Lancasters compared with those equipped with earlier turret designs, because the gunners were better able to spot the enemy fighters and initiate the pilot's evasive manoeuvres before the night fighter could bring its own guns to bear. The positive impact that the turret had on the morale of the crews of Lancasters so equipped are hard to exaggerate, not least for the rear gunner himself, who for the first time, instead of having to exit his turret rearwards and travel back down the fuselage, pick up his parachute and escape through a door on the side, could now simply tumble out into the slipstream of the Lancaster between his guns and operate the parachute that he was already wearing. And I think it's not widely known that the crews of Bomber Command did not wear parachutes. Only on the captain's order to abandon the aircraft would they then have to clip on parachutes and then exit the aircraft, all of which was fiddly, in the dark, took time, and it accounts why so many Bomber Command aircrew never survived. It is worth quoting Bomber Harris's letter to Alfred Rose shortly after VE Day. He wrote, "Dear Rose," it was a more formal era, "you and your people have given us what is easily the best turret we've had up to date. Furthermore, it is the only turret from which gunners can escape if they have to abandon the aircraft with any real chance of getting away with it. And we have had several Rose turret occupants back as the sole survivors of crews. I know you and your people will consider that to be of itself a very great reward for your untiring and successful labours." The Rose turret was, as Harris remarked elsewhere, the only improvement made to bombers' defensive armaments after 1942, and it was tested by Alfred Rose himself from a platform overlooking the River Trent behind me. I should add that the company's designers and engineers remained tightly connected with the local station commanders and the men who flew the bombers, ensuring that the realities confronted by the crews were understood and taken into account in their designs. The company directors laid on social gatherings for locally based squadrons, and it's a sobering statistic delivered by a retired Royal New Zealand Air Force flight lieutenant visiting Roses after the war, that of 36 New Zealanders who had once been entertained by Roses on a Sunday night in the wartime period, only 4 actually survived the war. As Darren mentioned a moment ago, Bomber Harris, who wasn't known to leave his nerve centre at High Wycombe, visited the Albion Works. But its most famous visitor of all was, of course, Wing Commander Guy Gibson, the famous leader of the Dams Raid. It's worth mentioning actually that this isn't just oral history, because at the Heritage Centre the Roses tablecloth is there, and all the visitors, all the Bomber Command visitors, were invited to sign that tablecloth, which was later embroidered, making permanent the record of their visits. And Arthur Harris, Leonard Cheshire VC, as Darren mentioned earlier, and Gibson's signatures are on it. 617 Squadron had only formed in March 1943, 2 months before its momentous raid on the Muna, Ada and Zorpa dams in the Ruhr Valley. Barnes-Wallis's revolutionary bouncing bomb, officially codenamed Upkeep, could not be delivered by a conventional Lancaster bomber, so urgent modifications had to be made before the aircraft embarked on their mission on the night of the 16th to 17th of May 1943, 80 years ago, in a couple of weeks' time. No delays could be afforded because the moonlight conditions and the water levels in the lakes next to the dams were only viable for a very short period of time. Working hand in glove with the Scampton engineering officer, Roses rolled their sleeves up, working 24/7 to complete the work. History doesn't quite recall exactly what it was that Roses contributed to that engineering effort, but as we heard earlier, we know it's important, because the following morning, after the announcement of the raid on the radio, the senior engineering officer at Scampton phoned Roses and said, "Tell your lads this was their job." Gibson himself was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest decoration for valour, and many other survivors were decorated too. But the cost was terrible, with 53 of the 133 aircrew participating in the raid perishing. Of the remainder, only 48 survived the war. The last survivor, squadron leader Johnny Johnson, MBE, who ardently kept alive the memory of the Dambusters story in recent years, finally hung up his flying boots last December, aged 101. 617 Squadron lives on, of course, equipped with the RAF's latest fighter bomber, the stealthy short takeoff and vertical landing F-35B Lightning, which is based at RAF Marham and sometimes on board His Majesty's ships, HMS Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a real privilege to recount the long and vital relationship between Rosas and the British Armed Forces, in particular the Royal Air Force, and the vital contribution that the workers at Rosas factories undertook during the Second World War. To quote Bomber Harris once again, Rosas were a typically English family firm, the sort of firm which can do anything without any fuss, and with a comparatively minute staff in the design and drawing office. Their contribution to the war effort mattered just as much as the men who flew the bombers. And it's therefore my great privilege to unveil this blue plaque, recognising the company's contribution and the endeavours of all who worked at Rose Brothers during this country's darkest hour. Right.